Maps are cool. Maps are fun. And sometimes there are things on maps you can play for thousands of hours without ever noticing. Hi, I'm John Crowman, and we're gonna walk around empty Apex maps to find out useless information about them. Before we go, I don't want to animate more lip sync, so... Much better. Last time, we explored the landscape of Kings Canyon, and with 5 more to choose from, I decided the next map we'll explore will be the featured map of Season 3, World's Edge. Though before the Apex games stepped onto the map, it used to be known as New Dawn, a mining colony on the planet of Talos that inhabited the region after a rare mineral compound was found underneath the magma that floods across the planet. This mining colony was founded under a committee of companies that led the development of the settlement, with the DeMeo Mining Company leading the mining operations in the region. Because trying to mine through literal flowing magma might be a little dangerous, DeMeo installed a series of thermal stations across the area to cool down World's Edge and make it habitable. And that's why we will be starting here, at Epicenter, one of the 2 major stations that manage the cooling of the magma. Well, used to. You may have noticed that this station has a small problem with it. You know how you shake a can of soda too much and it explodes when you open it? Yeah, basically that happened, but instead of a sticky mess, you got a lethal flash freeze that destroyed an entire city. We're going to have to go to the other major thermal station to really find out how these things work. This one's only been turned off instead of going kablooey, so the magma in the area has been resurfacing around the station, but it is still largely intact. The method they use for cooling the magma is by drilling into the earth and distributing a coolant into the ground through the drill. These giant pill containers are where they store this powerful coolant, and you can see when handled improperly, they have some explosive effects. These 2 large ones are pretty evident, but you probably didn't notice that these smaller towers all around the map are also thermal stations. They're used to cover specific areas, and notably are housed around the major settlements of Skyhook and Capital City, putting together a map of all the locations where they could cool the magma. But real quick, how do they even do this? Let's for a second think about magma. The magma on Earth averages a temperature of anywhere around 1300 degrees Celsius. That temperature is higher than the melting point of most metals we use here on Earth. And while we have found ways to survive scorching heats with the materials we do have, we don't often subject those materials to those scorching temperatures 24/7. It is insane to think of any man-made machinery capable of withstanding these temps at all times, let alone a coolant capable of keeping parts of this gigantic volcano cool enough to live in. But that does mean from here we gotta suspend our disbelief that this lava would instantly burn us alive when we touch it. Or if we touch these grates, or metal platforms, or really anything. As far as the actual mining operation goes, we don't get too much of a clear idea on how it works here in the map. Lava Fissure is about the only mining operation we see on the map, and outside of the giant drills, we don't see much of what it's drilling or taking out of the ground. So I'd imagine the main mining operations happened in other regions of World's Edge, while this specific area was the manufacturing, residential, and logistics hub for the colony, which we can see in the 2 major factories here. Hey, why aren't we going to the next scene? Hey! The 3D animation ran out! What's going on out there? Oh yeah, I'm just tightening up my new chair from Flexispot. Your what? My C7 Max from Flexispot, our sponsor for today's video. I've been working long hours animating and editing for these videos, and my old chair left me with some pretty aching back pains after the end of a long workday. So when Flexispot offered me an upgrade, I got the chance to use it while I worked on this video. And let me tell you, back pain? Gone. Thanks to the C7's thick foam cushion and adaptive lumbar support, I got to finish off each day without feeling like I lost 20 years of life expectancy. That word. That comfort extended to gaming as well. With the 5D armrest, I could adjust them to match how I handle the keyboard. And if you happen to be a controller player, just recline back a full 135 degrees and let that aim assist do the work. On top of all of that, every single piece on the C7 can be adjusted to what you need it to be. Bring up those armrests, extend that seat, slap down that headrest, and turn it in whatever way you need it. With every piece of the C7 Max fully adjustable, I could adjust it to whatever I needed it to be. And you can too with a $30 off coupon by using my code C730 at checkout, as well as a 30-day return policy if it isn't right for you. Now, let me get back to it. Okay, now let's talk about the 2 major factories on the map. refinery, and sorting factory. Refinery is our primary depot for the raw minerals to go into and be refined into usable products, while the sorting factory is the location these products go to be prepared, packaged, and shipped out of the colony. In the original version of the map, we actually got to see these shipments get prepared inside the factory. This production ended in Season 4, but it was still cool to see. Fun fact, this is actually where Forge was killed in the Season 4 teaser trailer. You know, in case you wanna know where a murder happened. A fascinating part of the factories though is definitely these stacks just outside both of the facilities. Stepping inside, you can look down and see a gigantic turbine running underneath, being powered by the heat of the magma, which to me looks like the power generation the colony uses for the factories. Given the sheer abundance of magma in the area, it makes sense that they'd use at least some of it for power. It also makes for a great place to land at. Whee! But you may have noticed that these factories are very far from each other. In fact, every part of the mining operation seems to be separated with pretty sizable distances. It's a good thing that World's Edge is equipped with a train. This colony's got a train in it. Train. It's a maglev with plenty of cars. Train. It'll get you where you need to go. Train. Man, I'd like to have one in America. Every major location on the map has a train station built for our maglev train to arrive at, with an entire network of rails spanning the entire region. Back when the train was still running on the map, it would arrive at these stations, and even reveal special loot when it arrived at the factories. The train has been long since decommissioned, unfortunately, and out of everything in the game, I want it back. Choo choo. This train line for the packaged goods ends at the city of Skyhook, where all of the products are shipped off of the planet from the Central Space Elevator, managed and run by the company Estrella Transport. If you've never seen this type of structure before, the space elevator is actually a real concept that was theorized and researched by scientists here on Earth. In fact, the city of Skyhook is actually a reference to one of those concepts made by John Isaacs, the Skyhook. The idea of a space elevator is to connect a cable line anchored onto the planet into a counterweight that sits beyond the geostationary orbit, creating a line that an elevator can follow from the planet into space, which would take out a lot of the heavy cost of trying to get ships and rockets blasted off of the planet before they can get anywhere. The space elevator concept isn't currently a feasible thing for us in the real world, but in a universe with highly advanced forms of space traversal, a space elevator would be a cost-effective way of transporting goods from a mining colony such as this. And it gives us a chance to really look at it up close. Holy shit, that cable is huge. Sometimes you forget about the scale that a lot of sci-fi worlds tend to be at when they play at a mostly grounded level, but stuff like this really reminds you of how tiny you are in comparison. We can now look at the actual towns around the map, and they happen to be far more interesting than King's Canyon because the colony of New Dawn is far more developed. The cities of World's Edge clearly have a lot more going on, and we can take a dive into it. Before we do though, let's make something clear. The New Dawn colony, and World's Edge as a whole, is a mining colony. Everything here was built off the mining industry developed here. And as such, there are a few key companies that manage the colony that we have to talk about. I'd say, based on what I can find across the map, 3 main companies ran a majority of the colony: Demeo, Proteus, and the IMC. Demeo would be the primary managers of New Dawn, being tasked with the maintenance and upkeep of the thermal stations, as well as heading all the mining operations that were conducted here, all with the tagline of renewable mining. Yeah, sure. On the other hand, the management and upkeep of the towns developing in New Dawn was handled by Proteus, a company with hands in what looks to be city design, management, and medicine. Interesting combo to say the least. And finally, we have the IMC, who most likely were the umbrella funding the entire colony, with all the crates and shipping coming out of the colony being labeled with IMC branding. So the hierarchy comes out to something like this. This helps make it clear what we're going to find in the cities of Skyhook and Capital City. Both of these cities have the same building sets and different layouts, so we're just going to look around Capital City to learn about life in New Dawn. Just mind the cold. We can split these skyscrapers and buildings into 3 separate groups: residential, office, and commerce. Our residential buildings give us the startling realization that very few of the workers and employees in World's Edge had their own living spaces. Nearly every residential building on the map is a communal living space with bunk beds for the workers to sleep in. There's barely any dividers between each space, and some bunks are quite literally surrounded on all sides with other beds. Living in Capital City or Skyhook really meant no privacy at all times. and makes me think they didn't even have privacy in the bathroom either.
Hey people.
Sorry, just gotta brush my teeth here, partner. Don't mind me, I know you had that Taco Bell earlier. You just do what you gotta do. This one apartment building that's in both cities does feature a more traditional apartment setup. It has a lobby for mail and visitors, and each individual floor being a separate apartment. It's pretty nice, actually. I could see myself living somewhere like this. At least if it wasn't for the advertisements constantly running inside my own home. Do you think they have to pay the electricity bill for these ads? But you can't spend all your day in the house anyways, so it's time to go to work at the Proteus offices. Whether you're working in reception, design, general office, or medical, you always have a place in Proteus. The medical lab is by far the most interesting of the three. The second floor of the lab is an incubation center for fauna and plants. I'd have to guess that these would be used in the medicine and treatment of the patients here at the colony, but I'd much prefer if they kept these plants separated from the piles of garbage stacked up in the corner. Seriously, could nobody put it in the can? Actually, no, they couldn't. This can is like 3 inches deep. No wonder. On the third floor is the medical labs, with pretty much all of the medical procedures being conducted in these futuristic pods where all the testing, diagnosis, and treatment would most likely be done. And hey, if the treatment fails, these pods can also be used as coffins. Very cost efficient. But finally, we get to look at the part I think is the most fascinating: the commerce buildings. There are 3 main buildings I've found in the cities that sell products and goods to the citizens living here: the diner, the shop, and the market. The market is familiar to the night market on Kings Canyon, with a focus on individual stalls for merchants to set up in, whereas the shop is a multi-use complex with an office above it. The shop itself sells a variety of goods such as bananas, cigarettes, and wine, otherwise known as a single dad's late night snack. The fascinating part of these buildings is once again finding signage in multiple different languages across them. We can once again find Korean, Japanese, English, and now Russian. Apparently the Russians in the frontier love milk, as that's the only thing labeled in Russian. There is a lot of multiculturalism in Apex, which we already knew in the legends, but it's always fascinating to see it featured in the world itself. And these shops actually tell us that these parts of the game go beyond just the languages. The advertisements across the market show us products priced in Japanese yen. The vending machines too are marked with the Korean won, and those same advertisements with yen also include USD pricing. Surprisingly, inflation hasn't been too bad on them. They can buy milk for $1.99. This is 700 years in the future, and you're telling me the price of vending machines are the same? Don't mind me just booking my flight for the frontier. If they use a wide range of currencies in the market, I wonder what currencies I can find in the diner. This restaurant is an entire self-service joint. There's only one space for an employee to manage the floor while workers gather their items from the dispensers. You can choose from anything between ramen, melons, honey bubble tea, milkshakes, and drugs. But let's take a closer look. All of these goods are marked with a D currency symbol. I can't think of any currency that uses a capitalized D, and the machine confirms it when I see the clarification in the corner. Oh my, that's company script. In case you don't know, tons of small mining towns and lumber companies back in the late 1800s to early 1900s would often be pretty cash poor for most of the workers. So many of these companies running these mining towns would pay their workers in company scripts, which could be used in company stores to buy the items they needed, oftentimes at a high markup. Because these companies have a monopoly over the market in these towns, the company stores would be the only way you could get items you needed, making the citizens of the town dependent on the company. And World's Edge has the same thing going on in company credits. This entire diner is only available in the DeMeo company credits, and most likely this store too. The only place you could go for other currencies was the markets, which somewhat explains why there's so many different forms of money available, including why there are so many different bank ATMs around, one for Angel City Bank and one for Monaghan Banking. There had to have been a pretty large currency exchange ongoing in the colony to help keep up with the needs, whether it's trading company credit or getting the specific currency you need for merchant goods. I don't think the devs planned to create an entire currency exchange market here on World's Edge, but they definitely placed everything needed to make it, which is pretty damn cool. Not everybody in the colony lived in these cities though. In fact, a good portion of the workers lived on site at different facilities. And this is where we see the modular nature of this mining colony. You may have noticed that all the cars seem to have come off the same factory line. But did you notice that the buildings outside of the cities are all built out of shipping crates? Every single one is made in a way to quickly put together, reusing every possible material to create a space for workers to stay in while on the site, which explains how they could get a ton of them up all over the map. We got a ton of cool spaces to look at, but first we have to... Huh? Wait a minute. What? What in the hell is going on with these signs? Okay, if you didn't watch the first video, I had a mild mental breakdown trying to find out the identity of a chemical based off of its hazard signage. Mainly this one, an NFPA hazard sign with the labels of 1, 2, 3, and an oxidizer tag. To put it frankly, this doesn't exist. But I came to the conclusion that the chemical inside these canisters were some form of fuel or oxidizer used for ships and possibly heating. There were a lot of ideas and thoughts in the comments about what it could be, but largely the answer stayed the same. That was until I saw this sign on the blue crates of World's Edge. And this crate. And this building. And this train car. And room, and what is happening? These all can't be oxidizing fuels. The building shouldn't be either, and what does a passenger train car need a chemical hazard sign for? This goes beyond just the NFPA signs too. Every sign on the map is wonky. Service shaft. Please use designated safety routes. What safety routes? What safety routes? Warning, pump starts without warning. Where's the pump?
What the hell are you talking about?
This one's even more egregious. These signs here are communication relay signs in reference to the Titanfall 2 mission, The Beacon, where you use an arc tool to power an interstellar relay. The sign even references the arc tool and the radiation inside of the core. So these buildings should be incredibly radioactive, right? Right? Yeah, it's a radioactive garage. You're telling me this antenna and dish needs the same signage as this? I cannot comprehend why these signs are here, or why they are everywhere. In fact, the only way I can explain it is that the IMC and their companies are just blatantly disregarding safety laws in their businesses. Wait, are the IMC flagrantly ignoring safety regulations in their activity in the frontier? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much this could be the answer. When the IMC returned to the frontier before the start of Titanfall, they initially started rapidly developing their operations across the frontier, investing heavily in mining and resource gathering operations to ship back to the core worlds. Given how quickly and aggressively the IMC initially began this work, it isn't impractical for us to believe that they were willing to cut a lot of corners to get these operations running quickly. And getting all of the proper safety regulations in the mining projects addressed would have cost them time and money. So to bypass these safety regulations, the IMC and their partner companies bribed the regulators to ignore the blatant safety violations and plastered fake signage all across their equipment heading to the frontier so they could create a veneer of safety behind their business practices. Oh my god, I have discovered something massive, a conspiracy at the heart of the New Dawn colony. I need to share this everywhere I can. I would like to apologize for the previous section of the video. I was not in my right mind. And the kind men and women of the IMC have done no such acts such as conspiracy to defraud safety regulators, bribery of government officials, or human rights violations. I have learned the error of my ways and would like to remind everyone to take interest in the latest warp tours hosted by the IMC. Come take a trip around the galaxy today. Can I go now? So, now that I am legally binded from discussing anything in the previous section, let's move on to the last major part of World's Edge, the research operations ongoing in the region. You may have seen these blue and white buildings scattered around the southern portion of the map, and they have the primary purpose of being the environmental research outpost for scientists at the colony, which I assume came from the Cliffside Company, given the all-terrain research vehicles that would be used by the research teams. These RVs on treads are featured in Alto and Botany variants, and would have been used to allow for remote work from the scientists to be conducted. What were they researching exactly? Well, despite this area of Talos being a volcanic hellscape, there is a surprising amount of life developing in the area. Namely in the geyser strip that cuts through the southern side of the map, connecting to this megafauna known as the Tree, with two of the biggest research sites being the Geyser Site and the Tree Site. Before we talk about those, I want to quickly mention the third biggest site, the Dome Research Site. This site is specifically researching the eggshells that scatter across the bottom end of the map. And as impractical as it seems, these research stations were probably made when the magma was still being cooled. So it's somewhat feasible for people to be here. What are these eggshells though? They're all over the skybox and on the map, but I wasn't entirely sure what they were until I watched an old dev stream on the map and learned that these shells are actually lava bubbles. The idea being that they were huge bubbles of lava that formed and had the outside layer of rock solidify, holding it together like a giant egg. But when the igneous rock shell eventually cracked, the lava inside burst out and formed the small river of lava that flows in the region. The research teams here would be investigating these shells, probably to understand how a lava bubble could even do that. And it maybe explains why the town of Molten Hills, now known as Lava City, is the one city on the map with very little left of it after the magma started heating up again. Now, as we go to the other sites, we have to ask ourselves what the research teams were doing here with the massive megafauna. The roots for this giant leaf fella stretch out pretty far into the ground, and I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. But what's interesting is that the roots stretch over the massive springs that we mentioned earlier. The same springs that reach all the way out into the geyser site on the opposite end, with similar, albeit smaller, plants growing in abundance here. This entire strip of yellow is actually a long sulfur spring. All of this yellow rock around the areas are sulfur, and most likely is mixing with the water being heated up by the magma under the ground, causing the massive geyser we see here. And because we know this is a sulfur spring, we also know that this entire area smells like shit. Sulfur springs are infamously known to create a rotten egg smell thanks to the hydrogen sulfide in the water and air, and would be downright terrible to stay in for long. Not to mention that under the right conditions, they can even be toxic to humans. Maybe there's a reason there's radioactive suits inside the research sites. What's even more dangerous than that is the geyser itself. This is a massive, constantly erupting geyser, with more water coming out of it per second than I have the patience to calculate. Geysers are formed when a bed of heat, usually magma, has a natural pipeline created in the rock above it that becomes occupied with water. That water inside of the heated rock begins to boil, and if the circumstances are right, a geyser can form as the steam and hot water are released to the surface. What makes regular geysers different from this geyser is that geysers normally aren't constant. They'll go off intermittently, sometimes seemingly at random and sometimes at a consistent rate, but pretty much never erupt at all times. There are two ways we can look at this. Either the research team was here before the geyser was active and was primarily focused on studying the fauna of the springs, or they were here when the geyser was active and had a very vested interest in figuring out how the fuck this thing worked. As someone with absolutely no knowledge in this topic, I have no idea. But what I do know is that if you touch that water in real life, you'd burn up faster than a Katy Perry song. Now, just like before, I'm not going to be able to cover everything on the map in this video. There is just too much on one Apex map to fit in a reasonable time. But there are still a lot of fun things to mention. For example, the Easter eggs. Did you know that these street signs on the map are actually references to the developers? These two signs specifically are the names of senior writer Manny Hagapian and narrative design director Mohamed Alavi, written in the signage. And the New Dawn sign outside of Capital City is another reference to the development of the game. Captain Dingus on the right side of the sign is a nod to a playtesting name used during the development of Apex. And you can see in this loading screen art another example of that name in the top left corner, as well as a dreadlocked crypto, funnily enough. And if you've played around on World's Edge long enough, you'd have seen these pictures of a cute little puppy all over the map. This puppy is Yuki, pet of lead level designer Rodney Reese, who unfortunately passed away during the development of World's Edge. To memorialize his beloved dog, Rodney hid pictures of Yuki all across the map. And if you mark them out, you'd find that they actually lead to a far north corner of the map where each of the pictures rest, as well as loot bins with guaranteed high tier loot. Good dog. But there is actually one more Easter egg I haven't mentioned, or more accurately, nobody has mentioned. Back when World's Edge initially released, there was a big hunt for Easter eggs across the map, including the search for the World's Edge Yeti, or finding out what these names are. None of these are actually confirmed Easter eggs, but there is one hunt I can confirm. The Nessie of World's Edge. Much like how Kings Canyon featured a series of Nessies across the map as an Easter egg, there is a Nessie on the map of World's Edge. Or at least, there was. Back in February, I had the opportunity to interview Rodney Reese for the Stormpoint video. And during our interview, Rodney happened to mention this.
But I'm sure, I promise you somewhere on the internet, someone found that. They never found the Nessie, though.
Excuse me?
They never found the Nessie of World's Edge. I put it in too hard a place. The Kings Canyon Nessie was like kind of legendary. Like you did this thing and this giant one rose from the sea, which was a little trick that Chad Grenier, who was a designer at the time, now he's our game director at Wildlight, but he put that Easter egg in there. And then when I was making World's Edge, I'm like, I got to do something cool now for this Nessie. You can't put this tradition. And no one ever found the Nessie of World's Edge.
Now this Nessie most likely doesn't exist in the live game of Apex anymore. Rodney left Respawn after Season 11, and the map has been updated plenty of times since. So we don't know if the Nessie Easter egg had ever been removed. But what we do know is where it would have been.
I'll give you a clue.
Okay.
It was in Lava Fissure. That's all I'll say.
After hearing that, I scoured Lava Fissure on the original version of the map, checking every nook and cranny I could find. And because of that, I am proud to present the Nessie. Okay, I didn't find it. I welcome anyone who has hours of their day to waste to search the map too. It's hardly the last thing I missed. And it's practically criminal that I have spent over 20 minutes talking about World's Edge without talking about Bloodhound, who was born on Talos before the meltdown and watched their own father die in the flash freeze. The updated versions of World's Edge follow along that story from Bloodhound, with themes around the exploitation of Talos and the people who reject it. But we don't have time to talk about it today, so I encourage you to do it instead. Scour the map for the pieces I missed, find what else the devs left for us to discover, and maybe even find a lost Nessie in the process. These maps are the work of hundreds of hours from developers who left their mark in ways you never see. But if you take the time to look at them, you may find that those unremarkable details are more interesting than they'd seem. But while you're exploring, don't ask about the signage or I'll end up in court. Hey there. I have some quick notes I want to add at the end here while the credits roll. First off, thank you again to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. The C7 Max genuinely helped a lot while making this video, and I really can't think of a better chair to recommend for long hours at the desk. You can once again get a 30% discount using my code C730 at checkout. Link in the pinned comment below. And it's been a while since I've done this, but I want to give a quick thank you to the supporters of the channel. Pursuk, Order Thoreau, Chili Dick, Jiaozhen Chen, The Big Mufa, Ashley Bunnies, and Florian. If you want to support what I do and help keep these videos going, you can support either here or on Patreon for $3 a month. But if you want to show support without paying, you can share this video with your friends and give it a thumbs up. I'm trying to reach 20K by the end of the year, so any love helps. And at the end, thank you for watching. If you made it all the way to here, write peanut butter in the comments. Otherwise, this has been MooreOver. Have a lovely day.